Donoram.com. This is SuperNintenBeau, and I'm going to talk to you guys today about the Sega Genesis, called Sega Genesis here in North America. It was known as the Sega Mega Drive in PAL territories, Europe and Australia. But the Sega Genesis, to me, I'm North American, it was released in my neck of the world on August 14th, 1989, though I wouldn't pick it up until a few years later. And I know my handle here on the internet is SuperNintenBeau, and I'm doing a Let's Play of a Super Nintendo game currently, but really, I was a Sega kid. And today I just want to discuss my 5 favorite games of all time for the Sega Genesis. And now this is a little inaccurate, it's just the top 5 games I liked, but I'm only allowing one representation of series that I liked. So for instance, probably all 3 Sonic the Hedgehogs would have made it, but I'm only going to allow one, for instance. So we'll just jump right on in. Won't waste any more of your time. Coming in at number 5, I'm going to go ahead and actually one of the best-selling games for the Sega Genesis. I believe it's the best-selling non-pack-in title, Disney's Aladdin. Disney's Aladdin was a hell of a game. And it was, of course, based on the 1991 Disney movie. It was, somewhere around there. And it was like the coolest movie when I was a kid. Like every kid loved this movie. They couldn't get enough of it. In fact, we watched it in 2nd grade in class, just because we all loved it that much. But it was released November 11th, 1993, 11/11/93. And it was just an example of everything a platformer should be. You're outrunning enemies, you're slashing your sword at enemies to make them poof away. It's a Disney game, so they don't die, there's no gore, but they do poof away. And just a good example of everything a platformer should be. You go through levels collecting the scarabs, and one thing that always attracted me to the game was it was a very colorful game, very vibrant. The graphics were awesome. The graphics actually reminded me a lot of the movie, which is really cool, because I remember as a kid, you buy games based on movies or TV shows, and they don't resemble them at all, period. Not in plot, not in visuals, not in the way you would think the movie would play as a game. Excellent examples of that are the Jurassic Park games, almost all of them. The Batman video games based on the Batman and Batman Returns. Just a whole bunch of terrible licensed movie games out at that time in that era, but Aladdin was really the cream of the crop. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of butthurt and hate over this, because it's also a very hated game. So it's kind of a good example of a polarized game. And usually on polarized games, I take the hate side just because I enjoy the emotion of hate more. But I love this game. I can't lie. Number 4, Beyond Oasis, March 15th, 1995. So a little late in the Genesis' career. We're going on year 6 of the Genesis reign. 1995, deep in the console wars. Interesting thing about this era and about these games actually is these weren't games that you could have played the Super Nintendo version or the Genesis version. It's not like nowadays where everyone gets a copy of the game, Xbox 360 and PS3, and you just wear your flat bill hat and argue about it at GameStop about stupid reasons why these games are different even though they're the exact same. No, back then when you chose to own a system, there was actually meaning behind that choice. The console wars in the 1990s were the war between Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, and what was better and who deserved your money, because a lot of families didn't have money to just buy their kids 90,000 game systems back then. So you usually got one, you dealt with it. I got the Genesis. My brother, for his first system, got an old system at the time when he was old enough to play the Super Nintendo. So that's a little bit of background, and Beyond Oasis was one of Sega's many answers to the Zelda series. They didn't have the same games on both systems. I mean, sometimes they did, very rarely. But they did try to copy genres a lot of the times because you want to capitalize on that success. Just like in the world of wrestling, we had the Monday Night Wars during the 90s, and they would literally build wrestlers around other wrestlers to fit what was popular at the time. So Beyond Oasis is what is known as a Zelda clone. Sega had a lot of these. Beyond Oasis, Light Crusader, Landstalker. But I think Beyond Oasis is the best example of that. And Beyond Oasis, thematically is a bit different in that thematically it's slightly Arabian, slightly 1001 Nights. So it's kind of neat there. You play Prince Ali, who finds this magic wristband, and now you've got to go on an ass-whooping journey. Much like a lot of Zelda clones, you find some magic item at the beginning, and now next year or so of your life, you're just going to go around the land whooping some ass. And Ali does that very well. So you've got your dagger, which is your main weapon in the game, and throughout the game you're going to find other weapons, but they're more like power-ups because the more you use them, the more uses you expend, and they end up disappearing. But they're very useful while you have them. You find little spirits that can cast magic spells, and it's a very interesting set. One thing about Beyond Oasis is the challenge. The challenge is very much more present than in Zelda, and personally I believe more so than in Light Crusader and Landstalker. Beyond Oasis is the most challenging of them all, and almost my favorite of them all. Can't ever beat Zelda, because Zelda has such a special place in my heart from the very early days of the Nintendo. And even though I was a Genesis person, I still preferred the original. So Beyond Oasis, definitely one of the best Zelda clones of all time. Way up there with Secret of Mana. Number 3, Shining Force. Shining Force was released in July 1993. Sega has a way of being ahead of its time, especially in what it introduced to American audiences. Strategy RPGs were already huge in Japan. RPGs in 1993 were still very much a very niche crowd in America. And Sega just said, you know what? Whatever, we're just going to release Shining Force. And it was a strategy RPG, which is turn-based, you fight on a grid. It's basically Dungeons & Dragons at a video game format, but because of the nature of it, they called it strategy RPGs because it more resembles, I guess, Americans more like Warhammer, like a tabletop game. Doesn't make much sense to me, but maybe that was their thought process. Anyway, Shining Force, there was already Shining in the Darkness, and like Shining in the Holy Ark would come out later on the Saturn, so there's like a meta series of this or whatever. But Shining Force was a couple of games for the Genesis, one for the Saturn. They even had a Sega CD one, but the original Shining Force stands as the best to me because it's not that long. You could beat it in about 20 hours, I think, 18 to 20 hours. And the story's very simple. This evil comes back, and you've got to stop it. But it was the gameplay. In 1993, no one had ever heard of strategy RPGs over here. So when it came out, and my mom let me rent it, it was a pretty big shock to me to see the gameplay. I didn't know what the hell was going on. But you kind of adjust to it and take off with it, and it's going to forge a lot of memories. And I think everyone that enjoys strategy RPGs should play this one. Number 2 is Phantasy Star 4, of course, which made my top 10 list. Phantasy Star 4 is a JRPG. It was one of the first ones I played back in it came out in February 1995. I didn't play it then. I played it later. But yeah, I don't know what to say that I didn't cover in the top 10. Just that it's a system-defining game. It's one of those where if you know someone that picks up a Genesis at a yard sale, I would suggest getting that cartridge first. If you know someone that has a Wii, I would suggest getting that on Virtual Console first. If you know someone that buys the Sega Genesis collection for PS3, I would suggest playing Phantasy Star 4 first. It's just that good, and there's no way it'll disappoint you. Easily one of the best of the 90s RPG crop, which the 90s RPG crop is a very, very hallowed hall. I would say that the 90s were the golden age of RPGs, and personally, I don't think anything except for Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy III can even stand up to it. And thematically, it's so different that maybe it's even apples to oranges. Maybe it's just its own category. Anyway, we'll move along to number 1. Number 1 was also featured on my top 10 list. Obviously, if it makes my top 10, it's obviously going to make my top 5 of a specific system. But Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and there's really nothing I could say about this game other than the reason it came with the Sega Genesis is because you almost didn't need any other game. I still play this game all the time. almost every format that it's released on, I buy it just to make sure that no matter where I am, I have a copy of Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I look forward to the day where my son plays Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Like, I'm going to share Sonic the Hedgehog 2 stories with him and make a little video with special music of us playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and have a little picture on our wall that says, first time playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2. It's just that good. And it never stops being fun, never stops surprising you. The music, actually, I had a friend over the other day who was commenting. I was playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2 when he came over, and I was on the second world, the chemical plant. And he mentioned that, wow, that's one of my favorite video game songs of all time. And I said, of course it is, because the music in this game is awesome. Because it's just an all-around great game. So I would suggest to play all 5 of these games. I would suggest, I'm personally making this the summer of 16-bit for myself. Because it was the greatest era of gaming. Almost everything good about video games was born in this era. And a lot of what was good about gaming died in this era. So, anyway, this is SuperNintenBeau, and those are my 5 favorite games for the Sega Genesis. And, have a pleasant day, and I hope you enjoy the games.